Greetings and welcome to another episode of I Survived Youth Group in the 90s. I'm your host, Scott, and with me today, of course, is my co-host, Caleb. Caleb, what's going on?
Not much. Beautiful. Did I say munch? Not much. A beautiful Sunday afternoon. Excited to be with you guys. Yeah.
And here we are recording podcasts in our basements. We are back again to talk about the experience growing up as youth group kids in the 90s and how that has shaped our adult lives. We'll talk to old friends about their faith journeys spanning from the 90s to today and discuss current cultural topics through the lens of people who grew up during that era. So, Caleb, what are we talking about today?
Yeah, so today we're going to talk about, and I'm going to use this kind of generic phrase for it, but we're talking about the idea of fake Christians and kind of where that phrase came from and kind of how it's been thrown around and how it's evolved even for us and how we've interacted with it. Came up on our first episode, this idea of if you're not going to our youth group, are you really a Christian? And so kind of some of those topics and kind of even how it's evolved over the last 20, 30 years. Hi, this is Caleb, the producer of the show, just breaking in like I do every episode to remind everyone that the views and opinions expressed on this show may not actually be held or even approved of by everyone appearing on this episode. One of the goals of this show is to give everyone a safe space to share their opinions and thoughts on deeply personal matters of faith. We are not looking to start an argument, but instead let people share how they feel. We also know that our memories of events that happened 25 to 30 years ago may not be 100% accurate. We assume everyone's best intentions as they share how they remembered the experience of their youth. Now, back to the show.
And especially in this year, in this season that we're in, it's come up quite a bit. So we thought that this topic would be best suited with someone else to share their thoughts as well, because you're probably all tired of hearing just Caleb and I speak. And so we have a special guest today. Alex, welcome. How are you doing?
I'm good.
I'm good.
Happy to be here. Yeah, it was a blast to be on last time and figured, if I can spend an hour with you guys, I'll do that.
That's so kind. This is the kindest thing anyone has said to me all week.
Oh, wow. I'm sorry.
No. Yeah, we're Minnesotans. Those compliments make it awkward.
It's true.
No, this is the timing is a little odd because this podcast is going to come. This episode is going to come out before Alex's interview comes out, just by virtue of what randomness we decided to throw these out. So Alex has already recorded a show with us that is scheduled to come out in about a month-ish from now. So you'll hear his personal experience as a youth in Five Oaks during that interview, but we enjoyed the conversation with him so much and thought this would be he'd be a good person to speak with on this topic, not only for the fact that, of course, he's very well spoken, but also, too, he's basically a generation behind us, and his perspective is different than ours. So we wanted to combine those two in this conversation. So
if you want to have a compliment podcast, we can just toss compliments back and forth, and I'm happy with that.
Yeah,
I'm already uncomfortable. I'm just gonna bail. If that's where we're going, I'm out.
Shortest episode ever.
Caleb, I've been meaning to tell you about your sweet radio voice.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Soothing.
Yours beats mine because I have to manipulate mine just a little bit. Take the bass down. Yours is like, whew.
Oh yeah. Natural. We're down there naturally.
Well, Caleb, if you can maybe talk about where this idea came from and kind of introduce it with the story, about fake Christians that you kind of saw online.
Yeah, this is going to be weird. So I will be as brief as I can, which is not a strength of mine, but I'll do it. So I'm involved with kind of a music community on Twitter is how I would describe it. We talk music all the time, and it's called CCM Twitter, the hashtag CCM Twitter. Shout out to CCM Twitter if any of you are listening. It's super fun to talk with them. So I had thrown out a post. I had seen somebody make a comment about John Cooper of Skillet. And the responses underneath it were literally like the most Twitter responses ever. One was, I love him. He's the greatest. And the comment right under it was, I hate him. He's the worst. And it was funny in that in general, the CCM Twitter folks that I talk with, we just don't go there. It it feels there's a lot of respectful conversations, people respectfully disagreeing, but that was like this very Twitter comment. So I threw out there the idea that it's just fun that we don't see that very much in this community that talks about music, that we just don't get this, I hate him, I love him, or well, people say they love stuff all the time, but in general, we steer pretty clear of it. And one of the responses underneath that was, why would anybody hate John Cooper of Skillet? And if you know who he is, you probably can understand where he's become a inflammatory, that's probably not the right word, a divisive individual, a controversial individual. And so he kind of threw that question out. And I think he was very sincerely asking, like, what's going on? And like, so a couple of people responded. He was like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Oh, I didn't know he had written that book. Oh yeah, that makes sense. But one of the comments back was, people hate him because he calls out fake Christians. And it was just such this like moment for me. And I responded to that person as, yep, we're the worst. Because I'm sure John Cooper would think of me as a fake Christian.
Same.
And so it just was, and he never responded, that guy never responded. But that got me thinking. I literally took a screenshot of that comment and sent it to Scott and was like, hey, here's the topic. Let's talk about this idea of calling other Christians fake Christians. So that's how we got here. Sorry, that is a totally rambling, weird story, but that's how we got here.
Look, we're looking for content, and why not? I mean, and this will be kind of an addendum to our 3-part politics series, only because it does have to do with politics, and we obviously are in that season. But we also kind of wanted to trace that because of some interesting responses we got from that first episode.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about that topic specifically, and again, Alex is a generation behind us. He might have experienced this differently. So, let's talk about first and foremost, what do we remember about, for lack of a better word, judging other kids in high school regarding their faith. I will throw out that in our first episode, we talked about going to the Lutherans to proselytize to the Lutherans and convert them, and the Catholics, because we were told in youth group, they have not really made a commitment to Jesus. So we wanted to go convert them. And then somebody, I guess we had a fan at that time. I don't know if that person's still a fan. But they messaged us and said, hey, I was part of your youth group. I remember going back to where I had moved from and going to our Baptist youth group and trying to convert them. So we were literally evangelicals trying to convert Baptists, which is ridiculous to me. So I'll open that up to you guys. Like, what?
And ridiculous to them. Like, looking at it in hindsight, they said that as well. They were like, they were not, like, when you say ridiculous, like, they were agreeing with you in hindsight. Like, oh yeah, that was, I couldn't believe we did that.
It's been there from the beginning, let's say, right? Why was that there, do we think? So guys, share your story a little bit. Like, what do you remember about being judgmental in high school about that stuff?
Yeah, I mean, you point out the first introductory episode, and something that stuck out to me was when you talked about going to Young Life, trying that on for size. That was an established kind of organization in Woodbury, and that stuck out to me because I had the same experience where I went there, and for whatever reason, I felt like these people are either too cool or like I don't fit in here. So I'm not gonna. At the time, Young Life and Five Oaks were trying to have this more of a bridge, kind of having Young Life kids get more connected to a body of more organized, body of faith in the church. Josh DeLucia was running it at the time, so I think he reached out to Tim, and some of Austin and I were supposed to be like the youth group ambassadors, which really just inflated my already very like zealous ego of being this stalwart, just like defender of the real faith, because you had talked about just feeling like it was you and you alone that had the answers, not just for the unchurched or the unchristian, but like people that call themselves Christian but weren't actually Christian because they didn't subscribe to necessarily your specific beliefs. So I had a very similar experience where I not only went to Young Life as a like Five Oaks ambassador and felt turned off by that for whatever reason, I judged those kids actively. And like if I saw them in the hallway, I would have that ping of like, that's someone that is a pretender. And I look back on that kind of with some shame, maybe some guilt, just because like I don't know. I feel like that's very un-Jesus of me to be like, these people, because, and it was mainly because of partying. These were the party kids that would go and, drink on the weekends. I'd be like, that they're not real Christians because there are these vices in their life. And like, you will know them by their fruit kind of thing. So I very much decided that kids that were trying to at least go to this thing and hear out the people that were talking about Jesus couldn't be real Christians because they had this in their life. And so I feel very sad about that because I ended up working for Young Life. Like I volunteered for Young Life for 10 years later, for 10 years, just after leaving high school, saw a lot of life change. And it really opened my eyes to like, okay, well, you were really judgmental. And I think I learned that more the older I get. I mean, even now.
I think a lot of us do. Yeah, similar to you, Alex, I could identify that Young Life group as being the partiers and be like, they're not taking it seriously, And maybe some of that conversation goes back to like what we talked about again in that episode, being set apart. You got to be different, right? And I'm not advocating it was okay to go party and drink when you were kids. Obviously not. But just that mentality of like, you're not taking it seriously enough and I am, so I'm better than you. It was not a humble response. It was a aggressive response. So maybe that was part of it, right? Is our understanding was our youth group takes this seriously. Everyone does not. We got to get that message out there. Caleb, am I describing that correctly?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Young Life it wasn't the right fit for me. I probably wasn't gonna fit in there. And I think it is totally that. Like I saw the party kids and I thought, oh, this isn't for me. And I think I don't have a problem with being like, Young Life isn't for me. I think that's an acceptable response. It's the response that we all take and internalize it to prop ourselves up as better and to prop ourselves up as we've got this together. And I think that's what makes that so interesting. And what has been going on through my head as we've started this podcast, and that came up in that first episode, is like, what made us feel like that was okay and good? Like, because there was it. Now we've seen we're up to 5 people at least who have kind of confirmed that experience, and it's like, what's going on? Why is that there? And why did we all feel okay with it?
This is a great question, and maybe we ask some people that too as we continue to interview them, but. I would say like there was a strong push to just convince us, right? If you're going to make a commitment here and turn your back on those things that are great, well, fun at the very least, like your parties in high school, and you're just going to go then decide to hang out in Scott's basement instead, which had no booze and had like a Sega Genesis. Like, you bet it better be worth it. And so there, I can just distinctly remember just an emphasis on like how much Christ gave up and how important that was, and how important it was for us to respond appropriately. There was a lot of passion involved in the relationship that you have. Of course, not saying that's a bad thing by any means, but then if I'm going to give it up and I see someone else saying they believe the same thing I do, but they get to go have all the fun and I might be decide not to. There was maybe even a jealousy thing.
I think, Scott, you nailed it with the idea of the seriousness, right? Like we did take our faith seriously. And because of that, I think then that permeated so many different things of our lives. I mean, I think about some of the things we did, Scott, that were like, we've talked about a couple of them. Like we wore signs on our backs to like try and promote our events. We were up at like 6:30 on Sunday mornings for leadership stuff. And that was after working I would work till 2 at night at McDonald's. I was working till I was closing at McDonald's. I wouldn't get done till 2. And I was back up at Perkins at 6 a.m. for leadership stuff, or 7 a.m, but really early. I mean, I think there was this seriousness that I think then that we put on ourselves, and that's fine. Like, again, if you just take that on as yourself, like that's okay. But if somebody else is not doing that, I'm using quotes, like not doing that, because you don't know. I wasn't hanging out with these people. I don't know what they were doing. I don't know what their personal lives looked. I didn't know what they were dealing with. But like to automatically assume I'm doing this, they're not, they're the problem. that's when it gets so out of control is the word I want to use. Although I just don't. I also don't want to look back and be like, you judged somebody 30 years ago. You're the problem. That's not helpful either. And so, it's kind of this weird dynamic.
Yep.
So I do have a direct question for both of you. How many times did you see a classmate in high school wearing a WWJD bracelet and get angry because you thought they should not have been? Because I certainly did that, like a lot. So I think that's just a marker, right? Is all of a sudden you got WWJD bracelets. They're kind of trendy. People are claiming something you feel that they should not, and all of a sudden you're just angry about it.
Because they should have been wearing the Lord's Gym T-shirt. If they really wanted to do it, that's really the way to do it. I don't, man. Was that when we were in high school, Scott?
For sure.
Okay.
For sure. They might not have hung around enough for Alex to see those. But.
I was gonna say I think there's a generational gap there because like they came back in briefly, but not enough that it was like a public thing.
Well, what were some of the things then besides wearing WWJD bracelets that would be markers for us as Christians? Like, what type of behaviors were we told that Christians should do, and which were the ones that we were told we should not do? We've already kind of talked about the partying, drinking thing, and of course, none of us advocates for that for kids and students. But do you remember anything that was said, like, you need to be doing this, and you should not be doing this?
I got one, and it's a good promo for an upcoming episode. Swearing, that was definitely one. Can't curse, can't swear.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah.
Forgot about the swearing episode, Caleb.
I feel like there was just so much more talk around what not to do, and that might even be an indication of like the kind of teaching. And that's not to say that there wasn't good teaching. It's just easier to say, hey, this is kind of out of bounds. And so those really became focuses. Swearing, I think, was a really big one. Just trying to, in every part of your outward life, especially. And in high school, you're already so focused on your outward life that it's just like there are judgments flying around all over. But if you know one of these people is claiming Jesus, then it's like, okay, they're out. Because at least for me, kind of moving back to this ambassador idea that I had given myself, but then also Young Life was trying to have me and Austin and Tim kind of be ambassadors for Young Life.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was such a point of pride of like, I am God's chosen, and I am God's chosen missionary to this high school, and I have to live very differently than the people around me. And so it became this, like, I built myself up of like, oh, well, I'm a good person because I'm not doing this and I'm not doing this. And it's hard to not do these things when you want to be liked, when you want to go to these things. And so I think that was part of the judgment for me I could see even just someone dropping damn here and there, like ass. Like I would be like, okay, well, you're out. And it really was almost as simple as that, because I felt like I was working so hard to be this ambassador. And not that I don't still feel, remnants of that, biblically we're God's ambassadors. But it was such this like pride thing that I think really eliminated 90% of true mission. It's like it's my feeling of I'm on mission distorted so much of the actual mission. Yeah. Or at least like the pride that got in the way of that.
I think there was a search and pursuit of holiness, and then the dark side of it, which was much closer than we thought, was just self-righteousness.
Yeah.
Compared to what everyone else is doing, I'm not doing these things. Whether it was partying, whether it was sexual activity, whether it was swearing, whether it was any of those kind of social indicators, right? We're not doing those. Why are you doing those? Just talking about this and hearing you guys say that, it makes me think like the way that we were told to be set apart was, like you said, Alex, not do these things. It wasn't necessarily like go above and beyond in the love and service aspect of stuff. Go, live outside of yourself for someone else. Not just live outside yourself by, spending time in the Word every day and praying and all that stuff. It was never like, hey, you will be set apart by showing how much you can serve and love someone else. I don't know if that would have made a difference, but that was certainly never a. And if there was any indication of it, it was do it so you can invite them to youth group kind of thing, make sure they get them in the doors.
I don't know. I mean, like, again, there's like some leadership gap. For me, I don't know if it was quite that cynical in terms of like the good things are just means to the end of conversion. There certainly some of that. I do know that the good things were taught as well. It's just, I think when you're a teenager and prone to self-righteousness as I was, like the do not teachings were a lot more stuck in my mind of like, okay, well, these are the boundaries. This is what I need to live in to stay a part of this community and this faith that has now meant so much to me.
Mm-hmm.
Christian music. There's another one.
Oh yeah.
Rated R movies.
100%.
I now they're starting to come to me a little. Rated R movies would be a good one.
Yep.
TV shows. I know I was not allowed to watch The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air because that was too risky. So that there's some of those things that start to come up. Mm-hmm. So that's all media. But media consumption, I think, was another one where I can see myself feeling better about myself because I listened to DC Talk instead of Nirvana.
Don't equate those, Caleb. Come on.
How dare you? I would go to school with mixtapes of the Christian alternative and I had full volumes of like CDs that I would burn of like, oh, well, I have a really great Christian alternative that's like going to be good for your soul to XYZ, like I was into it.
So do you still have any of those? And would you like, we should get that playlist up on the show notes because I think that would be really important. Maybe that's just my own personal bias.
I'm sure I could find some.
And that leads into the next part of it, which is like that leads into like a segmentation. And part of the message, I suppose, is this is not your home. You're going, after you pass, you will go to your rightful home, that sort of thing. And you start, there's a lot of ways that it was talked about to us where we were segmented out. And this was, Christians are separate from the world. But if we weren't careful, then it becomes, we have to provide, like you said, an alternative to secular XYZ. So now you have, Christian movie studios that make, really can make some pretty decent Christian movies because there's enough money behind it now. But certainly back in the day, you had ones that made poor Christian movies. I worked at Northwestern Bookstore after college for a bit, and I was the music manager there. And we would have every month these magazines come, here's the albums coming out, and they would tell us what to write on the board. If you like this, you should try this, right? And I had a big board in the store with 10 different artists or whatever, trying to say, hey, this is popular now. And Caleb, I know you and I talked about it at some point in our past, but I don't think we've brought it up on the podcast yet. There was literally time about a year or two after Backstreet Boys and Sync. So those guys were like, late 90s, really late 90s. So this was like mid 2000s, which tracks, right? Because those Christian trends end up becoming popular in the Christian world like a couple of years after. But there was a Christian boy band. Yeah. And we had you, I think it was you, I'm pretty sure it was UK. It was like, shouldn't we have a problem with this? Because they're all like, there's some lust involved here. Like they're all four really good looking dudes who can sing. And they're just providing a alternative that, maybe it's soul fulfilling, like you said, but is it good? Or why are we even doing it in the first place? Is it even necessary?
I mean, there were straight up posters in the early 90s. It was like, it was posters that were hung in Christian bookstores that said, if you like such and such band, you should listen to this. And that is the ultimate segmentation. Because it's not, it's telling you this is going to, it comes out of this satanic panic of the 70s and 80s, and it comes out of that, like, don't let your kids listen to this because it's going to steal their soul. But like, yeah, it is such I remember feeling very, very proud of myself that I didn't listen to secular music. And it's just funny to think how far I've gone from that. And it didn't last very long because it didn't, but it was that sense of pride. I think about it now that I didn't partake in that. And this just seems so silly now.
Yeah, this music changing is we can maybe this is again we can record an episode for Caleb's podcast later, but you find out that like at least working in that position, you find out that like record labels were putting together people who they called Christian just to fulfill a marketing need. Okay, we need a boy band, let's do this. But what you really found out was like there's Christians in all different types of bands, and you really wanted like a Christian X, a Christian movie, a Christian TV show, a Christian album. And so it became a cultural thing, where we have our own culture. If you want to, be part of it, come on in, you're invited, but at least we have our own stuff. Well, let's transfer to kind of more what it's like then today as adults, not kids. What do we see as the social indicators for those judgments for like a John Cooper? Here's a good segue, actually. Does anybody own a Skillet CD? I definitely never owned a Skillet CD. Alex, come on.
I'm sure I did. I'm sure. So there must have been some point where little Alex was behind on the other side of the counter, and you were there, because I am telling the truth when I tell you that I was at Northwestern Bible Bookstore at least twice a month from the age of like 7 to probably 13. Like,
oh yeah, us too. It was in walking distance of Caleb's house.
Yeah, I walked there weekly.
Yeah,
I'm sure there was overlap.
Yeah,
but yes, at least one Skillet CD. I'm sorry to report.
Nope, that's okay. They were a Christian alternative to probably like Metallica or something. Let's just throw a heavy metal. Dude, that was
slight on Metallica, like nothing, like I have never seen before.
Of course it is.
You're gonna get a lot of angry Metallica fans.
I know Lars isn't a good drummer, but that's a harsh comparison.
You know what? If I need to say spicy things to get more fans, I'll do it.
Hey,
I'll do it. No, so with a John Cooper anecdote there, what are some of those things that he or anyone else might call out somebody for being a fake Christian for? And I don't necessarily mean to say a conservative calling out a liberal, although that's certainly part of this and definitely something we want to talk about. It could be a liberal calling out a conservative, that sort of thing. But there are other facets, right? So what are some of those social things that we see in that conversation?
Oh, it's so hard not to dive just straight into the political point.
I'll throw out two easy words three. It's three words, but it's two phrases that I think get thrown around the most. And I'm not gonna I think it's pretty clear where I fall on these two. But like I've seen people say, if you're woke, not a Christian, and if you're a Christian nationalist, not a Christian. Like those seem to be the two buzzwords that I see it tied to the most. And I've shared about the idea that I've had my faith questioned, like to my face, by adults while we're watching our children, because I've said I don't always vote a certain way. So that has happened to me. Like, oh, I would never believe that somebody who doesn't always just vote pro-life is a Christian. Like to my face, as I'm telling them, I don't always vote pro-life because I don't always vote for the right party. But I think those two phrases have become the two most buzzworthy phrases where I see it go back and forth is you're woke, not a Christian. You're a Christian nationalist, not a Christian. Those seem to be the ones I see it around the most. And I'm tying that a little into John Cooper's book, which was like Wimpy Woke Christianity is the title of his book.
Oh, no. I did not know that.
So yeah.
Yep. Well, Alex, Caleb went there. He dove right in. So let's just go.
Great. It's funny having moved into different spaces where I have seen both sides to this, right? Tribalism isn't just out there, it's in the church. And I think I mentioned in the episode that we did before that from the front of one of our camps, someone listed off like, and this was a preface to like, you can do all these things, but still not be following Jesus or something like that. And he listed off like all the right things. And one of them was voting Republican. And I remember that moment very clearly because I like wooed from the back and because I knew that my family was voting Republican. And so I think that was a moment for me where like, I didn't even realize that was the right thing to do But then when I realized, oh, I'm even more in on this in group, I had like a visceral reaction where I whooped from the back because I was like, okay, I'm in. I'm even more in. But now I've been in churches and spaces where it's the opposite. And it's like, okay, if you're on the right, particularly if you're backing Trump, you're not a Christian. And so it's scary how we have just lost all. I think it's a pride thing too, because I think that we aren't humble enough to recognize that a lot of these issues are complicated. Just as an example, you throw out the pro-life thing. Rachel has been a labor and delivery nurse for 7 years and just moved into a nurse practitioning role in perinatal care, so high-risk pregnancies. And she started, I don't want to speak too much for her, but she started signing a contract saying, I don't want to be a part of any abortions, because she was ardently pro-life. And then as she moved through these 7 years in labor and delivery, you get some really ethically complicated things that make you think, I don't know if God's will in this situation is to make sure that this, 1% chance baby will live at the 99% likelihood of death of the mother. And that's like, I'm just pulling numbers out of nowhere, but it's just these issues that we feel so intense about often have so many valid perspectives and are so complicated. I think we're just not willing to recognize that it is complicated. And so it's just been interesting moving through my life, seeing the church enforce from the pulpit, or at least from up front, a person in leadership from up front, calling out a whole swath of just ideologically different people. Yeah, I mean, it's and I have felt that, I have felt at points in my life, the other side across the aisle is not a Christian. Like, they can claim Jesus, but if they believe this, they're not a Christian. Then I have stepped to the other side, and at times in my life I've been like, okay, well, looking back, I would have told old me that I wasn't a real, it's, right. I'm susceptible to that too.
Yeah.
100%. And I think you bring a good point about the complicatedness, is that a word? Of these issues, because it's so easy, especially now, especially on Twitter, and with social media, to have the keyboard courage just to spout your opinion, call someone a fake Christian, and then be done with it. Whereas maybe part of the seeking after the other person is understanding those issues more thoroughly, as opposed to just thinking like, well, if we just got to get rid of it, or we just we have to contain it. I think about, there was a company just the other day that advertised that they were doing away with their DEI group because too many of their, it was a tractor supply company, it was doing away with their DEI group because too many people were like, you have this group, I'm not shopping there anymore, kind of thing. And you get also too, like, I think of the issue of trans kids, and that's a huge political issue for many people, and I understand that's very difficult, but like, there are lots of people who are born intersex. That's part of that conversation. And if we hold on to a single truth that God created all people, we have to reconcile a bunch of those things. It takes time, it takes effort, it takes intentionality to figure out with these people in these situations that are way different than mine, what are you going through? Why is this complicated? Why is it more than just me getting rid of DEI or getting rid of Christian nationalism, to go on the other side? I can understand why people want to vote on specific values they want to impart to their kids. And I understand why they feel threatened by outside sources that they can't, because there are definitely certain places, and there are definitely certain schools, certain jobs that threaten people to say or not say things. So you're right, Alex. All these issues are complicated, and I think some of the judgment and some of the calling people fake is just the easiest way to deal with it. Right? I'm just done with you. You're fake. Get out of my face. I don't have to invest in you, right? Because continuing on our theme of angertainment, right, Caleb? I'll get a lot of usage. I've gotten a lot of usage out of that word, but
every episode.
I'm just retitle this podcast. The angertainment industry teaches you to not engage if you disagree. because the other person's the enemy, right? Whereas Christ and his teaching is, you're the enemy, I'm going to seek you out. And that's a way different mode of operating in society.
I think it's also just the brazenness in which we've come to do it. You talk about keyboard courage, but I've started to see it just interpersonally as well. I mean, I've mentioned the idea that, you know, we homeschool our kids, which means that if any of you homeschool families that are still listening to this show have kicked us out of all the co-ops because of my not conservative beliefs, thank you. My kids really enjoy being at the co-ops, but that has made us run with a very, very conservative crowd. Like, it's just the way it is, right? We homeschool our kids, so we just run with a very conservative crowd. And that's where those things have come up, where people are like, oh yeah, you know, and that has come up like to my face, that like, you vote a certain way. So I think that's what's interesting to me is why do we feel, I understand the keyboard courage, but it started to happen from like interpersonally. I can see it happening, and I can see it happening from the pulpit. Like that idea of we need to call out, I'll point to Grace Church. They did a sermon last year that was like the 10 reasons woke Christianity isn't real Christianity. And it was straight from the pulpit, and it was a bad sermon. I'm gonna straight up say it.
It wasn't a good sermon.
It was horrifying.
Oh no!
Because
Grace in Eden Prairie.
Yes, Grace in Eden Prairie. I think that's what it was. I can look it up, but it was something like to that effect. Because I listened to it, and I took notes on it, and I was just like, these are some horror. It was just this constant assumptions, and again, that idea of like, instead of actually getting to know somebody, it was like, well, if you're a woke Christian, you don't believe in the truth. You just want to make yourself happy. And I was like, what the hell? Like, that is such a stupid assumption that you've made.
Yep.
Like, and it just was that over and over again. And so like, it's gotten so it's not just keyboard courage, it's interpersonal. And like, where it scares me the most is the pulpit. And I probably need to find a flip side of it to really try and show I'm trying to be balanced. There where somebody's saying Christian nationalists are all not Christians as well. And I'm sure there have been sermons out there as well, but that one stuck out to me and it upset me. I was like pissed off. I had to like write it down. I was so upset because I was like, if I go upstairs and talk to my wife about this, I'm going to curse in front of my kids again. And I don't want to do that. So I had to like write down notes and like, then like bring it up with my wife later. He said this, it really made me mad. Are you still listening? No, you're asleep. That's fine. I'll just talk to the bedroom walls.
Get it off your chest.
Yeah.
Well, you know, in our last episode or 2 episodes ago, that was the church that I left because they supported Supreme Court justices. So it doesn't surprise me that that church would do that. But that being said, to your point, Caleb, to find examples, I mean, I don't have stats, but I would bet a lot of money that it's tipped. The scales are tipped in that regard on that side, as opposed to, you know, more liberal churches calling out Christian nationalism per se. And the politics has a lot to do with it, right? That they are supporting a political movement that is protecting their faith in a way because they feel that their freedom is threatened. Shout out to go listen to the last episode on freedom if you have not. But it is something that, you know, they're part of that movement, right? It's that political message has creeped into the church because the church is feeling threatened by someone educating themselves about why a DEI group is necessary, or what's the
you're talking about the 1766 project. Hi everyone, Alex here. You're probably wondering what the 1766 project is. I couldn't tell you. I was trying to refer to the 1619 project. I'll refer to it incorrectly at least once more. So just letting you know, it's not that. 1619 project. Very good. Would recommend. Okay. Thank you. Bye.
Yeah. And then what came of that, and like highlighting, like feeling threatened by critical race theory because it puts white people in a position of the villain and the enemy, when of course our generations have nothing to do with that, which, side note, always makes me laugh because evangelicals have no problem with the idea of original sin, but have a big problem with white privilege. And there's just a dichotomy there that always makes me laugh. But, you know, you start to feel threatened by it, And I think part of the messaging is, let's keep our congregation, let's keep our people away from interacting with those teachings, with those ideas, because we don't want them, jumping ship. We just want to stay away. So let's just separate them out and call them fake Christians, get rid of them, kind of thing.
It has made me so, I don't know. How cynical do I reveal myself to be on this podcast? It has really made me cynical towards a lot of the church in this country. It feels more and more, I don't know, like the church is just as, if not more, interested in power and control than they are about the way of Jesus. And it's scary, because this was never meant to be an empire religion,
Right.
I mean, at least like in the term of like power is our, like, we're doing this for power or to control people. I was just rereading because I just skimmed it in seminary, but the story of Christianity, and it talks about how there are a lot of scholars that think that we are still in the Constantinian era, but it is ending of Christianity, of this, like, the church is, and has been since Constantine, basically married to power in the West, and how that only now is starting to crumble, and we might be seeing the end of this, almost 2,000 year era of the church, and it's scaring people, and it's making people get in their camps and defend everything that might even look unfamiliar. It's just, it's so sad, because there is so much opportunity for us to love our neighbor if we just listen to folks like 1766 Project. Like, there are Christians heading up that thing. Like, there are so many other of these things that we are viewing as other and not compatible because they're other, or like just not a part of our understanding as we've come to understand ourselves as, like, generally good white American Christians. I mean, that's a very niche area. Not that everyone here is white, but just like speaking to critical race theory.
Yeah.
We're not willing to listen. I think that's like the biggest issue, is we're just so scared of losing power. But like Jesus' whole thing was giving up power.
Yeah.
It frustrates me.
Look, again, this podcast is free therapy. Let it out. Just, go. And also, we can all try and out cynical each other here, because it is depressing. It is difficult to watch. And it's, one of those things where if you don't, you feel like if you don't engage, sometimes you feel like if you don't engage, you feel like you're just giving up the opportunity to do good. And look, on one side, that means you have to defend your freedoms and your liberties, but also too, I feel like, as in the position I'm in, I get convicted that I should be standing up for the people who don't have as much as me, right? Yeah. And so some of those conversations just begin with getting to know someone else, getting to know someone else you disagree with, getting to know some, and not just on the topic of what you disagree with, but invest in how you can and serve how you can, because Jesus is not changing the world through a political party. And I think both have been convinced that the political parties will do that, one more than the other, if we at least have the moral ground, which is funny to make a moral argument when, evangelicalism is not based on whether you're moral or not. But as long as you can, you said the word tribalism earlier, Alex, as long as we can stay in our camps, the risk is far, far less. And so what risk do we take in going out there and creating relationships and investing in people that are around us where we can truly make a difference? It's hard.
It is hard. And we haven't had to do it in this country, because Christianity has been so dominant and so the norm. And generally, it's been a lot of white people. And we're starting to see different ethnicities, different understandings of even how to be Christian.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's a good point. It's new. It's all new. But I think we desperately need humility. And I think the church's biggest thing right now is we're just lacking it. And so we're lashing out.
Yeah.
Yeah. You said the idea of listening, and like I think that is on both sides, right? If you think it's crazy that somebody is still believes the exact same thing that they believed 30 years ago, like that's a good opportunity to listen, right? To be like, why is it that you're still, kind of still there? You might learn something. You might end up disagreeing, but at the very least, that would help us understand where they're coming from, and maybe that is enough to soften the blow. And on the flip side, somebody has totally changed their opinion on a number of political issues, or even what defines a Christian. Like that idea of just sitting back and listening, I think that's one of the things that we are hoping for in this podcast, not to really promote the podcast, but the idea of like, I want to hear we've said it before, I want to hear people's stories about where, if you're still at the same church you were 30 years ago, you've left the faith entirely, you've switched entirely. Like, we're not trying to convert you. We're not trying to change your mind. I just want to hear it because I think it helps me. Doing this has helped me a ton. Like, just kind of relax and, yep, this is good to hear and understand. And obviously I have opinions, but that idea of just listening to somebody else who says, hey, I'm a Christian, this is where I stand on this is where I think, like, instead of being like, well, I got to tell you what's really right, I'm just going to sit back and listen. Like, man, that I think if the church did that as a whole, took that on, I think that would be really, really powerful. And just for a show note, it was a message from February 19th of 2023. It was called For Truth's Sake. And it was talking about how progressive Christianity is progressive Christianity is not Christianity. That's the byline on the sermon. So you can go find it. It's For Truth's Sake. It was really, really insightful into, I think, why I responded when that guy said he calls out fake Christians. That's why people hate him. My response was super cynical. Yeah, we're the worst, because that's what I'm seeing here in a mega church in my own state. It's basically saying and I'm not that progressive. I mean, jeepers, I'm not progressive at all. I'm pretty middle, right down the road and right down the middle. But like, I've been called that my whole life. Like, oh, you vote Democrat occasionally? Not really a Christian, huh? Or people making fun of anyone who would vote Democrat while I sit in the room with them going, well, this is awkward, But anyway, whole other thing. So yeah, there you go.
When it's part of the church complex to have that message, I think that's very dangerous because it does not really allow for people to think for themselves, right? They're just taking talking points from a 35-minute sermon and then regurgitating those talking points. Yeah. And it also means you don't have to spend time with anybody, whether they are a progressive Christian or if they are of a different color or they're lesbian, gay, trans, you don't have to do that. You already know the truth and the talking points, right? And like you said, Alex, just a huge lack of, and Caleb, a huge lack of humility. And that's look, everybody can tell in our voice. It's just really frustrating for us to watch.
Yeah.
I also think I kind of get a little bit of where it comes from, because growing up in our brand of evangelicalism, was really sold on apologetics, really sold on certainty. Like, I am right and I can prove why I'm right. Yeah. Like, the amount of time. So it clicked in my mind that, okay, I am a sinner saved by grace, and now this is my mission. And then I had the thing of like, well, what if I'm wrong? Oh, I can't be wrong. I'm going to go read 1,000 apologetics books. And so I think in the episode that we recorded earlier, I think I mentioned a little bit about how going through the pandemic, all the social upheaval, and seminary at the same time really brought me. I was already kind of like, public university, being around just more people with more ideas, really started to shift my bundle of answers to a bundle of questions. And that was really unnerving. And so I feel like we in the church, sometimes for reasons that are helpful in the formation of faith, we're given a lot of answers and how to believe the answers, and not given much space, or maybe enough space, for questions and the ability to be curious, even spiritually curious, which I think is so important, but scary for a pastor to give someone the liberty to be spiritually curious.
Yeah. No, shout out Pete Enns and his book, Sin of Certainty. Caleb, we've dropped some pastors and authors' names on here, hoping they would listen. If Pete Enns listens and wants to come on, then that'll be my final podcast because I've made it. But yeah, I mean, that was, you're right, Alex, is like, there, you don't want to, I think there's this thing in evangelicalism, you give them an inch, you'll take it for a mile, right? You give them a little bit of doubt, or you allow it, make it permissive. All of a sudden, boom, 6 months later, they're gone or they're woke or whatever. And I would argue that let the Holy Spirit do the work. If that's what you truly believe, let the Holy Spirit do the work.
Yeah.
So lastly, we can end here. I'm always sensitive to how the outside world looks at Christianity, right? There's still a part of me that wants them to convert, engage, be curious about God and Jesus and all that stuff. But, living in a time where the idea of being an evangelical or being a Christian is so marred and so kind of paired with you're going to be a Republican too, I'm very sensitive to those who on the right or the left are not Christians and how they look at that interaction. So, like, I don't know, what do you guys think? Do you think Christians get judged too harshly by the outside world? Is it fair? Is it something that, we have to be conscious of, or should we just like forget about it? Who cares what they think? They don't know, like that's always a hard one for me. I'm so sensitive to their understanding and interactions with us.
I have strong opinions on this.
Good. We got 2 minutes. Go.
Great.
What?
Here we go. I think that it's easy to caricature people, and that's on the right to the left. That's the left to the middle. That's the left to the right. And I think Christians, and we've done this to ourselves to a degree, at least in like the public sphere, have caricatured ourselves. And I think we've caricatured ourselves for being very against certain things.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think it's just Republican, at least like where I'm at right now, being in Minneapolis, it feels like Christian, maybe even bracketed evangelical, is far right. It's not just you're red, you're deep red. You are actively trying to make abortion inaccessible. It's not just like you have like, you want to like take back the right to marry for people that are not heterosexual, all of these things. And I think that we have to be very aware of that, because I think the church, this is just me, has a lot of work to do with trust. I feel like we have lost a lot of trust from the average person. I think you see that in the numbers in terms of like the church is no longer really socially relevant. It's very obviously not the force that it was 20 years ago, even 10 years ago. It's just the numbers of the nuns are shooting up. More and more people are not going to church. I don't blame them based just off the behavior of the most public Christians. And so I think that or people that profess Christianity, again, I'm doing the thing where I'm calling people fake, but like if we're
it's hard.
It's hard. But I think that we have to recognize as Christians that if we're going to reach what is more and more an unchurched and even cynical, like jaded population, we have to recognize that we have not been the knight in shining armor that we think we are a lot of the time. Like we have been the perpetrators, and we try to paint ourselves as the victim, but we often have hurt people, intentionally or not. We have, and I know this because I have friends that have left the church that have been very, very hurt from the church. The pastor's wife from my old church, she's a therapist, like a crisis counselor, and one of her main like client populations are religiously traumatized folks, and it's generally it's generally the Christian church, almost exclusively the Christian church. We've done a lot of damage. And I think if we're going to repair some of that trust, we have to acknowledge that. I don't think we can brush that aside. I think we have to recognize, like, hey, we have messed up.
Yeah.
And that starts here, like I've messed up. I know that all my views are not right now, but I want to move forward in the way of Jesus, which I see as being abounding in grace and love and being genuinely interested in people, not necessarily as a means to an end. Not at all as a means to an end. Just like I think that love is powerful enough to connect people to God. And I think Scripture bears that out. So all that to say, I think there's a lot of work that the church has to do in making up ground that we have lost by our own doing. And that's a lot of trust work, and that's a lot of love work.
Yeah.
That's a excellent answer. Justifies our invitation to bring you on. Good job.
Oh, that's very nice.
But it's you said the phrase there, intentional and unintentional. I think that's some of the hard part of it is that, sometimes churches, a lot of times churches, and I would classify Five Oaks, I haven't been there in a long time, but the vibe that I always got from them is they would never intentionally, pull a power dynamic over someone or ostracize someone or hide abuse claims or something, nothing like that. But I think it's important for all Christians, especially evangelicals, to understand that the secular world doesn't separate the two. Rightfully or wrongfully, that's just what it is. And I think you're right, Alex, about, the people who do, and particularly politicians who go on and profess their faith, and I would say they're Christians. I would just say that they're pretty aggressive. Like, what parts of Jesus and being the lamb, right, Caleb, being humble, approaching people with a sacrificial attitude, do you take in every realm of your life? And then let God work in the people who, haven't made a decision about Jesus yet. Let God do that work through that attitude, rather than saying, if we're going to save people, if we're going to save a culture, if we're going to save our grandkids and our great great grandkids, first thing we got to do is make sure we got Supreme Court justices, and we got to make sure we got our morality in the government space correct. Otherwise, it's not going to work. I just think that you're limiting the gospel severely.
Mm-hmm. And I feel like distorting it too, because I feel like the gospel was never meant to be about social control, which I think what we make it a lot of the time.
Fully agree. Well, Alex, thank you very much for joining us again. For the listener out there, Alex's interview about his experience in the 90s, or in the 2000s, because again,
I was just being born in the 90s.
Yeah, he was just a little teeny baby. His episode's coming out mid-August, so be on the lookout for that. And hey, we really appreciate you joining with us, and it's been great to continue to catch up with you.
Yeah, so fun. Yeah. Anytime.
Let's try and enjoy this beautiful Minnesota afternoon with not as much cynicism and just kind of a little more joy. This was helpful.
I'm supposed to have less cynicism?
Yeah, that's the point here, dude.
Oh.
All right, thanks for joining us. Talk soon.
Thanks again for listening to this episode of I Survived Youth Group in the 90s. We hope you enjoyed it. Once again, we want to say a special thanks to Alex for joining us to kind of take a deeper dive into this topic. It was great to have a third person to throw out ideas and just kind of hear their opinions on it. And so we're really thankful that Alex could join us. And like we mentioned, Alex will be joining us later to kind of go through more of his personal story. We already recorded that episode, so it should be out sometime later this summer. So again, thanks, Alex, for joining us. It was really great to have you again. Let us know what you thought about this show or any of our other shows. Again, we know that this was potentially a touchy subject for some people and maybe a painful subject for some people. So let us know what you thought. We'd love to continue the discussion. You can find us on Twitter at the handle @SurvivedYG, and you can also email us at ISurvivedYouthGroup@gmail.com. If you're interested in being on the show, let us know. You can find us at either of those locations. Again, we'd love to talk with people about their youth group experience and kind of how that still has been connected to their life as they've grown up and either left the church or stayed at the church that they were raised in. That's kind of become our little tagline for this show, at least my little tagline for the show. Please subscribe and share the podcast if you're so inclined. Leave a rating or review. If you enjoy this show, you might also enjoy the other podcast I do. It's a music podcast called the Album Anniversary Podcast. Over the last couple of years, I've researched and documented the release date of thousands of albums. Throughout the week, I post about them on social media. We've had a couple different formats on the show, but it's an opportunity to sit down and talk about some of the music I've documented on my calendar and take a look at special albums throughout history. Once again, that is the Album Anniversary Podcast. The music at the beginning and the end of this show is the instrumental version of the song Positive Charge by the artist Dread Pirate Roberts. Thanks again, and we'll talk to you soon.
Or what's the education? We can cut this out as I think about it.
Can I?
This is all staying.
Education?
No, there's CRT.
All right, I'll call you right back. A bundle of questions replace my bundle of answers. Can that be the tagline for this episode, please?
Nice.
You like that?
That was great. Okay.
All right. Caleb, anything to end with?
No, I think that sums it up well. We could keep on talking, but I'm gonna show producer restraint and let that speak, because that was pretty beautiful. So we'll let that stand.